Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Marpe Academy. Today's session's on grout technology and then some golden rules of installation. Now, this is a very popular session that we do because there's quite a lot of issues with grout, and there's no doubt that the bulk of them is that people don't mix or apply correctly. So we'll go through the products initially, but the real important part of this session is about the installation. I'll just give you a quick look at our new Grout app that we've got that can be downloaded onto your phones, but it's a really good app these days where you can actually add tiles to it. You can select your grout color, with your actual tile. The calculations are much better because we've got now we can actually put in the size of your tile and the width of your joint and so on. So it just works out, how much product you're going to use per square metre. Obviously, it has the colour range there and it also has the product range. So very good tool. So just going through the Grout range, we started our entry-level products in our basic cement-based products, and then we go right up into our epoxy range. So there is quite a large difference, but in our entry level, our Colour range, even in this range, we actually have an entry level as well. So they are polymer modified cement-based grouts. So this gives it premium quality, nice stable pigments. Our quality control ensures that good batches and good batch colour consistency is always the case. Our Colour FF has a couple of step-up technologies. It has our drop effect and our bio block. I'll just explain what they are. So the drop effect basically gives some waterproofing aspect to the grout itself. So it makes it hydro repellent. So not fully waterproof. A lot of people see these kind of pictures and think, oh, fantastic, it's waterproof. It's not fully waterproof. That doesn't come into play until we get to the epoxies, which we'll go into a bit further. But what it does, it just gives more time to cleaning up spills. So if you most companies, their normal grouts, if you spill something on them, if you don't clean it up relatively instantly, it can stain. So especially things like spaghetti sauce, eggs, red wine, and that type of thing. So the drop effect it reduces the absorption of the product, so that it means that you've just got more time to clean up. You still should clean up. There's no doubt about that. The bio block is an antimicrobial agent, so this minimises the growth of mould. So again, you still have to clean. There's no two ways about that. We have people ring us up and say, oh, my grout's gone mouldy, and I still say to them, it doesn't come, in the bag, doesn't come with a little man that's going to jump out and clean your grout. You've still got to actually clean it. So, but again, what it does, it reduces or it extends the amount of time that you've got. So cleaning can be less, but cleaning is still essential. Then we step up into our Ultra Colour. The Ultra Colour also contains both those properties, the drop effect and the bio block, but it also has a special binder in it that enables the product not to contribute to efflorescence. So with the Colour, you can still get some efflorescence. With the Ultra Colour, you cannot get efflorescence, so it won't contribute at all. So you can see in those two photos down the bottom, it's just a microscopic look at the normal grout, where you can see the calcium in the blue, and in the Ultra Colour you can't see it. So what this does, it just increases the resistance to efflorescence. So we just get no contribution to efflorescence. So when people ring up and tell us they've got efflorescence and they've used Ultra Colour, I say it's not coming from the grout. It's more than likely coming from underneath. So be it the adhesive, the screen, renders, whatever you've gone over. So, but it won't be coming from the Ultra Colour. It also is a rapid set product. So the rapid curing technology gives greater protection or early protection to to getting wet. So rain, for instance, so you can grout in the morning. You know that there's rain coming in the afternoon. You've got like a 4-hour window instead of with the normal grout. You've got at least 8 hours you should be waiting for, or even up to 24 hours for normal grouts. But with the ultra colour being a rapid cure, roughly 4 hours before you need to, or anything under 4 hours, you need to be concerned, but anything over 4 hours of dry time for the grout, you don't really need to be concerned about it being affected by water. It also has a binder and shrinkage compensation technology, so this allows it to go to a wider joint. So we recommend up to, or we say that it can go up to a 20mm joint, and you're still going to get that fine grain finish. So with some of our other grouts that are designed to go into a wider joint, they've got a larger granule of sand. So you do, in some cases you can actually get the exposed aggregate type look. So with the ultra colour, you can go up to 20mm without having any exposure to the aggregate at all. The next step up is into our Keropoxy, so the resin-based products. Keropoxy and our Keropoxy Easy design, they offer the highest level of performance. So the lowest water absorption. They're basically waterproof. We don't use them as a waterproof membrane. A lot of companies do. They repair leaking showers and leaking balconies with epoxies. Yes, that is a realistic opportunity to stop water to getting underneath the tile. But the reality is, if you have got a leak, it's not a bad idea to actually work out where the leak is actually coming from and plug it up there. But yeah, as I say, there is a lot of companies that use our Keropoxy and our Keropoxy design as a fix to a leak, and yeah, it does work. But always remember that the leak is still there. Offers the highest stain resistance. Again, that's about that absorption rate. So epoxies being basically 100% waterproof, they get very little anything that's going to actually absorb into it. Now, I do talk about this a little bit sometimes on jobs where people ring up and say they have got staining in their epoxy. It's not a closed finish like the surface of a tile. It does have some pores into the actual surface, so things can get trapped in those pores, but it should be able to be easily cleaned out. So the easiest cleaning, there's no doubt about that. It's the highest hygiene performance, so it's got the HACCP rated. So it can go into restaurants, into food preparation areas and that kind of thing. And of course, it's the superior resistance to efflorescence. So you'll get absolutely zero efflorescence when it comes to epoxy grout. So there again, like with the ultra colour, if someone rings us up and says they've got efflorescence, it's not coming from the grout, it's coming from underneath. So sometimes this can be created with a hairline crack or a pinhole in the grout. So water's getting in and then coming back out via that entry point. So a little chart that's seen online just tells you what colours are involved, but the app kind of covers all that off these days, so a lot of people don't look this up anymore. The app's a far better way to go. Now, the important part of this session is the golden rules, the perfect grout. We find that when we don't do training for grout, mixing and application and cleaning, we get a lot of phone calls in relation to defects in grout, but the grout's made the same way every single time. Things are picked up in our QA, but things can slip through the system, there's no doubt about that, but it's very rare, and we find that the bulk of the time the problems are with the mixing and installation and washing off. So we'll go through the golden rules. Number one is make sure all spaces and crosses have been removed. This is a problem we see a lot. We get onto jobs where we see inconsistent colour. It's usually to do with the depth. So why remove them? Because the depth of the grout, so the strength of the grout is altered when it goes from a thicker joint over the top of a plastic spacer, because most of them are plastic. No absorption into the plastic, so the grout's drying at a different rate. You can get the cracking occur because the grout, if those spacers aren't pushed in far enough, quite often it can be a millimetre or maybe 1.5 millimetres of thickness of the grout, so cracking can take place. So all spaces and crosses should be removed. Number 2 is make sure the grout joints are clear to at least 2/3 the depth of the tile. So again, this is about the, creating strength in the grout by having that depth to create an area where the grout can go in at a certain thickness or width or depth to actually allow it to get to the proper strength that it's been made for. So, and it also affects colour consistency, as I say, like, just the same as the spaces. If we've got glue or any form of other residue sitting in the grout joint, and we've got the grout going deep, shallow, you are going to get, possible inconsistency. Less of a chance, but it is still a factor. Number 3 is give the concrete screeds and renders time to dry before grouting. It's a thing that occurs a lot. People will screed today, then they'll glue tomorrow, and then they'll grout the next day. So there's a lot of moisture sitting in the bedding. You can see in that picture, you've got let's just call it 150 mil of concrete. Then you've got 50 mil of screed. Then you've got 6-7 mil of glue. Now, if they've got their residual moisture in there, it's certainly going to cause a problem. That moisture is going to want to come out. And likewise, if they get affected by rain. So, if you've laid tiles today and you think you're going to grout tomorrow, but it rained last night, think again, just give it time to dry. So as water passes through the grout, it causes efflorescence, hazing, and colour blotchiness. So this defect that you can see there is just straight up that the grout was done over a wet adhesive. So that moisture needs to go somewhere. In particular, when there's a waterproof membrane in play, the moisture can't go back into the substrate. It actually has to come out via the grout joint. So, this is what it causes, the colour blotchiness and hazing. We always recommend to do a colour test. Be it on a sample board, be it in a small corner of the room, be it a blob that's made up. But we always recommend to do a colour test to make sure the colour is the one that you actually want. Why? It's because even though it is a works variation, if you put the colour that's been specified in, and then someone's not happy with it, then who wants to dig it out? It's a big or large and tedious job to pull the grout out. So do a colour test, make sure everyone involved is happy before you continue and grout the whole thing. So we've had areas where people do up to 200 square metres, and then they decide it's the wrong colour or not the colour that they actually want, and then it becomes a bit of a disaster. This is a really important one. Always stay within the water range shown on the bag. So go and buy yourself one of these little measuring jugs, or, when I was tiling, I used to have a bucket that was specifically made for measuring water for grout. So I just used to drill holes or cut slots into the bucket so the bucket could never be filled past the point where I wanted it to be. And what that did is it gave me or whoever, any of my guys that were mixing up their grouts, we always had exactly the same level of water. So adjust the bucket or go and buy yourself some form of measuring container to actually measure your water. But it's a really important thing to do. An extra 100 ml of water can make a drastic difference in, one, obviously the way the grout will react, but importantly the way the grout's going to dry. So why the curing reaction doesn't properly take place when you've got too much water, it will give a weak grout. So you can see in that little picture there that we think about cement as having fingers. So those fingers are growing, and too much water can actually shorten that life, or it can just give a weak grout. So, if someone rings us up and says their grout's powdery, it's normally because they've put too much water into it. So adding too much water can give light or blotchy colour as well. So there's, as you can see, there's quite a few things that will actually alter the way the grout dries. But a real important one is adding the correct amount of water and adding the same amount of water for every batch that you actually make up. It will really make a difference in having the grout dry consistently. Don't mix at too high a speed. It's not a real common problem because the mixers are designed these days properly, but people are using drills. You know, we find that they're at such a high speed. What it does is actually it whips air into the grout, and that air is going to want to escape when the grout's drying, so pinholes can form. So if you are going to mix it up with a drill, and it is a high-speed drill, it's a good idea once you've taken your drill out of there, just get your mixing trowel or gauging trowel and just put it into the bucket and just give it a bit of a slow stir just to actually take some of the air out of the product. Allow the slake time. So mix, wait, mix. Again, this is probably as important, definitely equal to the amount of water that you actually use. So it makes a huge difference of how the grout's going to react. So the working time of the grout, the open time of the grout, and then how it's going to dry. So remix. When remixing, it increases the workability of the open time, as I said. So you would notice if you only mix your grout once, so you put your water in your bucket, you mix your grout, and you only mix it once, the dry time is going to be a lot quicker, and it's going to be a lot stiffer to actually push around. So by reworking it or remixing it, the workability becomes a lot more creamy. The other thing is never try to bring grout back to life once it's actually gone off. So once it's gone off, you know, grout is relatively cheap to buy, but it's a very difficult and expensive process to scratch it out and redo it. So we don't try and bring it back to life. Once your grout's gone off or starting to go off into the bucket, the last thing we ever want to see anyone do is actually put more water back in and then give it another mix. So not only have we altered the water ratio, we're going to actually weaken the grout. So when we talked about those fingers before, what happens is you shorten those fingers and you also make them brittle. So, you know, you just got grout going off at different rates and in a weakened form. So never remix it, chuck it away and start again. Make sure you clean your bucket between grout mixes. This is a real common problem. You can see in this bucket there's old grout up around the side, and we find that, you know, some people, again, you know, they've got another 10 metres to make and they've got, you know, grout residue in their bucket, and they just put their water back in. They might even do the right thing and measure their water, put the powder back in, and they might do the right thing again about the mix, wait, mix, but they're mixing old grout that's already gone off, already started to go off. They're mixing the old grout back in with the new grout, so of course you're going to get blotchiness. There's just no two ways about it. So it won't cure at the same time. There's just no two ways about it. As I say, it's already started to go off, and there's no doubt it will give a some blotchy effect. So clean your bucket out. Doesn't take long. You know, quite often when we do our live grout demonstrations, I say to people time how long it actually takes me to clean this bucket out. The grout's still relatively soft. It hoses out very easily. So clean your bucket as you go, or have another bucket to use. Pre-dampen joints if you're working in hot, windy conditions, or if the tile is very absorbent. So what it does, it dries the grout rapidly, and it strips the grout of the water too fast, and it stops that reaction, so those fingers don't grow. So you can see we're going to end up with a weakened product as well. So just slightly dampen. We don't mean saturate the joints, of course. We don't want to wet everything that's under the tile, but a spray bottle, those little spray bottles you can get, just spray into the joints, or sometimes it's just a sponge wipe over. But you just want to try and have the grout drying at an even rate. And a slow rate as well. This is another one. So my three biggest ones in this whole lesson basically is your water ratio. So put the right amount of water in to mix it. So as I said, measure your water. Mix, wait, mix. Those two things are extremely important. The other thing is don't use too much water when you're doing your cleanup. So we can walk into jobs a lot of the times, and people are trying to use the grout all in one go, so they might grout up 10, 15, 20 square metres of tiles, and then they come back and start washing. You know, I always say only mix up the amount of grout that you think you can use in the right time to actually wash it off in the right time. So I've walked into mini jobs and I can see exactly where the guys have started. They've started in an area where they've, the wash up's quite easy. And then the further they get into it, the grout's hardened and quite often hardened on the surface of the tile. So they start to use more and more water for the clean-up process. And more water, again, as I say, we're adding more water. So we're altering the way that the grout's going to actually dry. So it's very important to only grout out as much as you can wash off in the correct amount of time. So normally 25 minutes, that type of thing. So of course it depends on the tile type, the weather conditions and so on. So if it's hot or you've got a porous tile, you might not want to grout as far. You know, a dark coloured tile on a balcony, for instance, in direct sunlight, don't go and grout 10 metres and then come and start washing. So just timing's a thing. But what it's about is actually using too much water in the actual process. So blotchiness can appear and powdery grout will be a case because you're putting too much water into the cleanup process. So as I say, just use your timing. It's not something we don't see. I've walked onto many a job and where they've got an issue with powdery grout or blotchy grout, and I can walk in there and say, I can tell you started here and you finished here, and this is what happened. And quite often the guys are not wanting to, but they're nodding their head in agreement because they know what's going on. When you are using, if you do have any grout residue that comes onto the surface, that dries on the surface, you do a little test area. Most grout haze removers are some form of acid, so they should only be phosphoric. We don't use hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid is just way too harsh. If you've got it to that point, then you've got a bigger problem. But the other word or the other name for hydrochloric acid is spirits of salt. So we're going to put salt into the system, which is going to increase the efflorescence. So do a little test area. You can see in the little film on the side, you can see the way that some acids will eat into the grout. And so you can see in the picture on the left-hand side where it can actually expose the aggregate in the grout, which is not something that we want. So, be deemed as a defect. So do a little test area, make sure you're not going to hurt the grout, and importantly, make sure you're not going to hurt the tile. And really importantly is make sure you're not going to actually hurt the surface of a natural stone. When all else comes to the end and you've got blotchy grout that's taken place, it's not the end of the world. Obviously we can stretch out a couple of mil and then re-grout over the top, or we do have a product called Fuga Fresca, which is a grout refresh. So not only is it used to bring old grout back to life, but it also covers up multiple sins in grouting issues. So very good product. The first time I saw it, I thought it was a bit of a gimmick, but these days I've seen it save many a job and save many hours where people were kind of destined to have to scratch the grout out and they didn't have to anymore. So it's a really good solution. When installing dark tiles, as I said, grouts or high profile works with efflorescence prevention systems are strongly recommended. So you can see that brown is representing a membrane. So as I said before, where we've got 150 mil of concrete, 30, 40, 50 mil of screed, then you've got your tile adhesive. They're all basically act like a sponge. So when the water goes through your grout or through a porous stone, it sits in those areas, and when the sun shines on it, it'll actually drag it out. So we do have another webinar on efflorescence systems, so I won't go too deeply into it, but basically the higher the membrane, then the less amount of water that can actually sit beneath the tile and create that efflorescence issue. But as I say, it's a good, you can look that up, it's a pre-recorded, or we do them live, but yeah, efflorescence prevention is certainly a big subject in the tiling and stone industry. This is why, it's because efflorescence look terrible. So it's worthwhile looking it up if you need to understand efflorescence, or you can come back to us and we can talk to you about the different products that are used to prevent efflorescence. We step up into our Kerapoxy range. I won't go too deeply into it. We do a lot of training on our Kerapoxies. The Keropoxy Easy Design is a product that we're just releasing in April of 22, and it's a brilliant product. It's so easy to use, it's not funny. But if you are going to break up the mixes, it's 9-to-1 by weight. So go and buy yourself a cheap set of kitchen scales. It doesn't have to be cheap. You just go buy yourself a set of kitchen scales. So if you are going to break it up, do it by weight. And the reason being is because too much or too little of the part B, which is the hardener, you are going to get soft sections in your grout. We would never do this with a cement-based product, but with Keropoxy, we actually use a lot of water to actually go into the cleaning process. The Keropoxy Easy Design still needs water. We don't need to use a scouring pad in some cases, but that white scouring pad that you can see in there with most epoxies is an absolute, essential part of your equipment. Plenty of water, so it doesn't affect the colour. It won't affect the grout at all, but it just makes the cleanup. In fact, it makes the cleanup possible. If you don't use it, your sponge is just going to be clogged up in no time. So thanks for your attention today. As I say, we do live training on grout. We really do find that it's very essential. It's amazing how many tilers come in that have been tiling for many, many years, and they come into our sessions and they actually learn something. Blotchy or powdery grout can be a common occurrence if you don't actually use, our processes. So good luck with everything, and my details are there, or you can go onto our website. As I say, if you've got staff that you think would benefit by listening to the pre-recorded version, then come along and listen. Take care. We'll see you on the other side.